But we begin tonight with the government's Housing Infrastructure Fund announcement. The construction of thousands of houses in Auckland, Tauranga and Hamilton will be fast-tracked after the cities were announced as the major beneficiaries of the government's $1 billion fund. The Prime Minister who made the announcement in Hamilton today says all up 5 councils will be loaned cash under the fund to help pay for water, roads and other infrastructure needs for 9 housing projects. Later on Checkpoint we'll go to Tauranga to ask exactly what this means. But first here's our political reporter Demelza Leslie looking at the details of the announcement.
The Contestable Infrastructure Fund was announced a year ago to provide much needed money to councils in high growth areas. Many of them are up against their debt limits and cannot afford to pay up front for the water, sewer systems and roading needed for extra housing developments. Auckland City Council will receive $300 million to support more than 10,000 homes at Whenuapai and Red Hills. Tauranga City will receive $230 million to support the construction of 35,000 homes in a new subdivision in Papamoa, while Hamilton gets just over $270 million, which will help it complete the Peacocks development on the southern border of the city. The other 2 councils to be funded are Waikato District and Queenstown Lakes. The Prime Minister, Bill English, says the funding will allow 60,000 houses to be built faster, in some cases up to 8 years earlier.
Because that's an explicit requirement of the fund, that our growth councils could show us they would be bringing forward more houses sooner.
There were a total of 16 bids from the 5 councils for the infrastructure funding. The Building and Construction Minister, Nick Smith, says a number of the proposed subdivisions were too small to be considered.
All councils that made bids were able to secure one of their projects. A number of the projects were not funded because they did not meet the test of bringing either new houses forward or sufficient homes.
But the money being given to councils is a loan. The Finance Minister, Stephen Joyce, explains how that works.
There's no interest on the Housing Infrastructure Fund. It's being repaid in terms of, on the transport side, in terms of an increased what's called the FAR rate, back to the Land Transport Fund over time. And on the water infrastructure, it's zero interest.
When do they have to pay it back?
I think it's over a 10-year period.
The Hamilton Mayor, Andrew King, says the loan his council will receive will help it realise a 30-year dream to open up the Peacocks development, which requires a bridge to be built over the river from Hillcrest.
It's been talked about for 30 years, it's been zoned for 18 years, and to be able to get this over the line is just fantastic. The bridge alone's $100 million, it's huge. But we've got to have bridges in Hamilton. Hamilton's built on either side of the Waikato, so we can't do this without bridges. So the bridge is the key. And then we've got to get the sewage from this area right back to the sewage treatment plant, which is at the far end of town.
The first houses under the fund are expected to be completed by late next year. But Labour's housing spokesperson Phil Twyford thinks the promise of 60,000 houses is an empty one.
Well, Nick Smith's made an art form of promising great things and never delivering. And we saw it with the special housing areas, which was their centrepiece policy announcement more than 3 years ago. They promised 39,000 houses. Fewer than 3,000 have been built in Auckland in the last 3 years.
The government says it will now work closely with the councils and developers to ensure the projects are progressed at pace. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Demelza Leslie.